In this session, we'll go over the key setups required for the demo. We first set up the logical and physical instances, and then we want to set up the signature types and signatures. We also set up the tracks and the functions required for this demo, as well as the test scripts associated with the functions, which will be stored on the Dropbox. We then move on to define the scenarios which list the steps involved for executing the end-to-end flow, and then we define the test data source, which would be a dynamic query in this case, as well as the data set. Let's first look at the logical instances. So we have to define one logical instance per instance type. In our case, we have Salesforce, Informatica, and Oracle R12 involved in this particular demo. So let's just click down on one of these, which is Informatica. So as you can see here, we just defined the logical instance name that along with the description. We repeat the same step for each one of the logical instances. Once the logical instances are set up, then we can go and define the various physical instances. The physical instance actually carries the attributes for that particular instance. For example, in the case of Informatica Dev, this is actually a development instance of Informatica, which is associated with the logical instance of Informatica, and this is a URL which needs to be used for navigating to this particular instance. And we can also associate the data source associated with this particular development instance of Informatica. Once we set up the logical and the physical instances, we can go ahead and create the signature types. We set up one signature type per application. So right over here, we can see a signature type for Informatica, one for Salesforce, and then one for Oracle applications R12. Let's drill down to the Informatica signature type. As you can see, Informatica signature type is associated with the logon function of Informatica login, which basically indicates that whenever we create a test function of signature type Informatica, it would sign on to the Informatica application using the logon function Informatica login. Similarly, we go and define for each one of the signature types. Once the signature types are defined, then we can go ahead and create what is known as signatures, our application signatures. Right over here, we can see an application signature for Informatica. As you can see here, this particular signature is using the username gnanth@solutionx.com, and it is associated with the application instance Informatica, which is a logical instance, and then the signature type is Informatica. And if there are any parameters associated with it, that will be listed right over here. In this case, there are no other parameters involved. Once the signatures are created, then we can go ahead and configure the test. The first step would be to create a track for each one of the functions. In our case, that we have created a track called Informatica, so all the Informatica functions would come under this track. Similarly, we create a track for Salesforce, and then each one of the Oracle modules. It is left to the user to catalog it the way they want to do that. Once the tracks are created, then we can go ahead and create a function. In this case, let's drill down to the Informatica transfer data function, which basically helps in transferring the data from Salesforce into Oracle R12. As you can see here, this particular test function Informatica transfer data is associated with the QTP script Informatica transfer data. So the function tag indicates the type of test agent associated with the function. We support besides QTP, PL SQL, Selenium, and Rational function tester. Since this is a Informatica related function, so the signature type would be Informatica, and then if there are any parameters associated with this particular test function, they would be listed here. Let's take the case of Salesforce create account function. Again, this particular function is associated with QTP script Salesforce create account, and as you can see here, there are a few parameters associated with this test function. Basically, what it means is we need to pass values for this function, function parameters for this function to execute. Once the functions are defined, then we can move on and create the scenarios. Scenario is where all the test functions which need to be executed to perform end-to-end testing are defined. In our case, right, let's move on to this Salesforce to Oracle R12 customer creation scenario. As you can see in this scenario, we have these 4 functions. The first function creates the account in Salesforce. The second function transfers the data from Salesforce into Oracle R12 staging tables. And the third function creates the customer on the Oracle R12 using a PL SQL API. And the fourth function queries the customer which has been created in Oracle R12. As you can see, these are the parameters which are passed while creating the function, while creating the account Salesforce. So once the scenarios are created, then the next step would be to create what is known as a test suite. A test suite would be nothing but an aggregation of multiple scenarios put together. In this case, you can see the test suite Salesforce to Oracle R12 customer creation. It has only one scenario underneath. We can add additional scenarios as needed into the test function, into this test suite. So this particular scenario is made up of these functions. Once the test suite is created, then we can move on to identify the data to be used for testing. Data can be passed in terms of data queries, which would be a SQL query to be executed on the target database, or it can be in terms of data spreadsheets. For our demo, we have chosen to use a SQL query, which is this particular query Salesforce customer. As you can see here, this basically contains a SQL with some static text combined with some dynamic data, which is basically minute and second of the state portion, so that customer name generated would be unique every time. And these are all the column values which are generated by this particular SQL. Once the data queries or the data spreadsheets are identified, we can move on and create the data sets. Data sets are nothing but an entity which provides the data for a particular test suite. So in this case, we have the Salesforce to Oracle R12 customer creation test suite. So this particular test suite is made up of only one scenario. So these are the functions underneath. So for us to execute this particular scenario, we need to pass values for all these parameters. So in our case, we are passing this using the data query Salesforce customer, which we saw just now in the previous screen. And this particular query would be executed against the logical instance of Salesforce to derive the values. So this would determine the data which needs to be passed for this particular scenario. The next step would be to identify what username and any other parameter which needs to be identified for executing this test. So as you know, the first step would be to log on to Salesforce and then create an account. So we would be using the application signature Salesforce G-Ananta, which basically logs in with the user G-Ananta. And then for Informatica, it is again using G-Ananta for creating the customer in Oracle R12 using PL/SQL API. It uses the username demo and then the responsibility receivables manager. And then finally, after the creation of the customer in Oracle R12, we log on to Oracle applications and query the customer using the username demo and the responsibility receivable vision operations. At this point, we have all the elements required for executing a test run. Let's take a look at the test function again and then identify the location of those test traces associated with the function. For example, let's look at the Informatica transfer data test function. Associated with this particular function will be the test script Informatica transfer data, and that is stored on the Dropbox, the cloud. So this is the local copy of the Dropbox, but it's actually stored on the cloud. As you can see, this is the test script associated with this particular test function. So in summary, these are all the key test setups which are required: setting up logical and physical instances, setting up the signature type and signatures, defining the track and functions, and then storing the test scripts on a Dropbox directory, defining a scenario and data query and data set.